Tonight we leave the familiar constellations of your ceiling behind and step into a darkness so complete, so vast, it feels less like an absence and more like a presence. You are not in your room anymore. You are standing on a rippling sea that has forgotten how to be wet, under a sky that has swallowed every speck of moisture from the world below. The air in your lungs is hot and crisp, carrying the scent of baked stone and infinite emptiness. This is the Rub al Khali, the empty quarter, a desert within a desert, a kingdom of sand the size of France. To your left, nothing. To your right, more nothing, sculpted into dunes that rise like frozen, tawny tsunamis against the horizon. The silence here isn't quiet, it's a roaring in your ears, a pressure. You take a step, and the sand whispers a secret that evaporates before you can hear it. This is where our story begins, not with a map, but with the profound, gut-level realization that every rule you've ever learned about finding your way is now useless. Your GPS is a brick. Your compass might as well be a toy. Out here, you probably won't survive this, unless you unlearn everything and listen to the gentle, ancient strategies of those who called this void home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the crest of a mega dune, your feet sinking with each step, the effort a stark lesson in inefficiency. The sand is finer than any sugar, and it gets everywhere, a gritty reality the romanticized tales of desert crossings conveniently forget. From this vantage, the scale finally hits you. It's not just big, it's repeating, fractal, an endless recursion of shape and shadow that deliberately scrambles your sense of perspective. Your modern brain, wired for landmarks, a distinctive building, a bend in a river, a street sign, short circuits. It's all landmark, and therefore, none of it is. This is the Bedouin's first and greatest lesson: surrender. You must first accept the magnitude of your own insignificance in this landscape. It's a humbling that borders on humiliation, but it's necessary. It empties you, makes room for new knowledge. Historians still argue whether the term empty quarter was first coined by Western explorers like Bertram Thomas in the 1930s or was an ancient, indigenous acknowledgement of its terrifying purity. What's not debated is that this sea of sand has been crisscrossed for millennia. People lived here, traded here, thrived here. And they did it without a single piece of paper telling them where to go. Their map was written in things you're currently ignoring: the texture of the sand underfoot, is it firm sapka or soft oak? The faint, almost imperceptible pattern of pebbles on a dune's windward face, the way the light at dawn stretches shadows into long, blue corridors that reveal the land's hidden anatomy. Let's get one mainstream historical fact out of the way early. The Rub al Khali isn't just a big sandbox. It sits atop the Arabian Shield, one of the oldest geological formations on Earth, and beneath those dunes lie secrets, not just lost cities like the fabled Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands, but entire fossilized river systems and aquifers, proof this was once a green, wet world. The Bedouin ancestors might have witnessed its final drying, their folklore a long, slow elegy for lost lakes. That very sand you're standing on? In certain parts of the empty quarter, it sings. Under the right conditions, usually when a dune face collapses or you slide down it, the sand grains, of a specific size and silica content, rub together to produce a deep, resonant hum that can travel for miles. Some dunes boom like distant thunder. It's a phenomenon called singing sand, and while geologists have their explanations involving friction and vibration, to a lonely traveler, it must have sounded like the desert itself was alive, whispering, or perhaps warning. You shiver, despite the heat. The sun is beginning its descent, and the temperature will soon plummet from a blistering 50 degrees Celsius 122 degrees Fahrenheit to near freezing. This diurnal swing is your first real teacher. Your survival is now a series of tiny, critical calculations. How much water you sip, how you ration the dates in your leather pouch, where you choose to make your minimal camp. The Bedouin didn't conquer this place through force. They did it through a respectful, almost gentle collaboration with its extremes. They didn't fight the emptiness. They learned to read its subtle, shifting text. And as the last light bleeds from gold to violet, you look up. The first pinpricks of stars are appearing. Not the few dozen you see from your backyard, but a torrent, a splash of diamond dust across velvet black. Your classroom, it turns out, wasn't on the ground at all. It was waiting for you overhead, all along. The cold of the desert night seeps through your woolen bisht, a harsh reminder that this environment deals in absolutes. You didn't just arrive here as a tourist with a canteen. You were, in the context of this story, born to these dunes. Your earliest memories aren't of playgrounds, but of the gritty feel of sand between your infant fingers, the sour-sweet taste of camel's milk, and the sound of the wind, a constant, shaping presence. Your childhood is a prolonged, gentle initiation into scarcity. While kids elsewhere learn to share toys, you learn the ultimate sharing equation: how much of your own water skin's contents you can offer a guest and still survive the next 3 days of walking. It's not generosity as a virtue, it's survival mathematics, codified into sacred law. Your first lessons are brutal in their simplicity. You follow your mother, not by holding her hand, but by staring at the backs of her feet, studying the precise, energy-conserving way she places each step. The ball of the foot touching down first, a slight roll, avoiding the sink and pull of a full heel print. Every motion is economized. You learn to scan the ground not for interesting rocks, but for the scorpion's telltale slight disturbance in the sand, or the shallow, J-shaped track of a sidewinder viper. The world is a text of potential threats and rare blessings. A playmate shows you how to find a cat-off plant, not to admire its tiny leaves, but to dig for its tuber, which when squeezed yields a bitter, life-saving drop of moisture. You don't have a sippy cup, you have the knowledge of 5 different plants that can quench a critical thirst. This is your normalization. The concept of having enough is foreign. The baseline state is having just enough for this moment, and maybe not the next. It forges a peculiar psychology. You develop a preternatural patience, because rushing burns calories and water you don't have. You develop a profound mindfulness, because noticing a single changed rock or a new bird circling on the thermal 2 miles away isn't observation. It's data collection for the ongoing experiment of staying alive. Historians still argue whether this austere upbringing created a culture of unparalleled resilience or one necessarily tinged with a deep-seated anxiety about resources. The poetry says one thing, the bone-thin remains in ancient graves might whisper another. Here's a mainstream historical fact to ground us. The Bedouin social structure, the tribe, Kabila, wasn't just a family. It was a mobile survival corporation. Your place in it determined your rights to water wells, grazing areas, and trade routes. This wasn't ownership in a modern sense. It was custodianship, owned and maintained through use and defense. A child learned his Kabila's territory not from a map, but from the stories of past journeys, the names of specific wells like Al-Ain al-Baida, the White Spring, and the alliances and feuds that governed access to them. Your identity was your tribe, and your tribe was defined by its path through the desert. Let's talk about bedtime stories. Yours weren't about princesses in towers. They were about jinn, spirits of the desert. But not just any jinn. Specific ones. There was the gull, a shape-shifting trickster that could appear as a lost traveler to lead you astray until you died of thirst. The lesson? Never follow a solitary figure at night without a known call and response chant. Then there was the Sailar, a female spirit said to dwell in specific, isolated valleys. Her territory was Mimaized and avoided. These weren't just spooky tales. They were vector warnings, biological hazard markers encoded in folklore. A place haunted by a Sailar was likely a box canyon with bad water or no exit. The monster story kept you safe. So you grow, lean and tough as old leather. You learn that wealth isn't gold, but a healthy female camel and the memory of a reliable, distant seep. You learn that hospitality is the ultimate social security. The man you water today might find you in a sandstorm tomorrow. And through it all, the emptiness ceases to be empty. It becomes a familiar, if severe, home. The endless repetition of dunes reveals its subtle grammar. The way the windward side is always harder, the leeward side always softer. You start to feel the desert's rhythm in your pulse. But to truly navigate, to move from surviving in a small circle to journeying across hundreds of miles, you need a fixed reference point. A true north. And as the last embers of your tiny fire die and the cold deepens, you wrap yourself tighter and look up. The true teachers, the unwavering guides, are finally coming into their full, glorious dominion above you. Your real schooling is about to begin, and the ceiling is the sky itself. The fire is out, the cold is absolute, and the darkness is so complete you feel you could reach up and break off a piece of it like black ice. But you don't. You lie back, your head on your spill bag, and you let your eyes adjust. And then, slowly, the world rebuilds itself above you. Not the land has vanished, but the sky. It is not a flat, dark sheet dotted with pretty lights. It is a deep, three-dimensional ocean, and you are at the bottom of it, looking up at a cosmos of impossible depth and clarity. The Milky Way isn't a faint smear. It's a raging torrent of luminescent dust, a spine of light cracking the heavens in two. This is your dome, your classroom, your map. And tonight, your grandfather, or your uncle, or the caravan's Khalid, the guide, points a calloused finger and begins your first real lesson. He doesn't start with constellations as pictures. He starts with them as fixed points in a great, turning machine. See those 7 bright ones, like a misshapen cooking pot? He asks, his voice a dry rasp in the dark. That's Al-Dab al-Akbar, the greater bear, what you call the Big Dipper. But to you, it's not a bear. The 2 stars at the lip of the pot? They are Al-Qaid, the 2 who follow. And they are the key. He shows you how to trace a line through them, straight up, and there, after about 5 times the distance between them, you hit a star of steady, unblinking light. Al-Jar, the forgotten one. Polaris, the North Star. It does not move. Every other star wheels around it in a nightly pilgrimage. That single point of stillness becomes the central pivot of your universe. You learn to find it from any pattern, from the sweeping curve of Cassiopeia, the lady in her chair, or by following the backbone of the Great Bear. This is celestial literacy. You learn the Manazil al-Qamar, the mansions of the moon, 28 asterisms, groups of stars, that the moon passes through each night on its monthly journey. Each mansion marks a shift in season, a hint about weather, a time to plant or to travel. Al-Sharatain signals the coming of the gentle spring rains. Al-Balder warns of the scorching, dry heat of peak summer. Your calendar is not on parchment, it's written in the slow dance of the moon through these stellar neighborhoods. Now for a mainstream historical fact. This Bedouin stellar knowledge wasn't born in isolation. It was a critical strand in the golden age of Islamic astronomy. Scholars like al-Sufi in the 10th century compiled and refined celestial catalogues, translating and building upon Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge, but often grounding it in the precise observational data and folk names carried by desert travelers. The Bedouin provided the raw, practical data of the skies, witnessed under the clearest atmospheric conditions on Earth. Many of the star names we use today in official astronomy, Akrab, Aldebaran, Altair, are Arabic, a direct legacy of this deep, practical familiarity with the night. While most cultures saw patterns of animals and heroes, the Bedouins saw the sky as a reflection of their own landscape and tools. There was no Orion the hunter. There was Al-Jabbar, the giant, with his distinctive belt of 3 stars, Al-Nizam. But his sword was often called Al-Dafira, the armlet. The Pleiades cluster wasn't 7 sisters, it was Al-Thuraya, a name evoking abundance and the start of the caravan season, and it was often seen as a tiny herd of celestial goats. The sky was a familiar camp, populated with known entities, not foreign myths. They even had a name for the dark patches in the Milky Way, Al-Bakar, the cattle, seeing them not as absence, but as celestial herds grazing on the starry plains. Historians still argue whether this system was precise enough for truly pinpoint navigation across hundreds of featureless miles, or if it served more as a general directional guide, a cosmic compass to be used in concert with a dozen other signs. The truth is likely in the middle. The stars gave you your bearing with sublime accuracy, but they couldn't tell you about the soft sand sea directly ahead that would swallow your camels to their knees. For that, you needed the earthlier knowledge of the day. But for now, you practice. You trace lines from star to star until you can close your eyes and see the great clockwork. You learn that as the night deepens, new constellations rise in the east, old ones set in the west, and the whole dome rotates around that silent, steadfast point of Uljar. You begin to tell time by the angle of the dipper's handle. A sense of profound orientation settles over you. The void is no longer disorienting. You are anchored to the cosmos itself. The desert may shift under your feet, but the stars are a fixed, dependable truth. You finally drift to sleep, not under an anonymous sky, but beneath a known and named ceiling, the first page of your living atlas memoized in the cool, silent language of light. When dawn bleaches the stars away, you'll feel a little less lost, because you now carry a piece of that fixed sky within you. Dawn arrives not with a songbird's chorus, but with a silent, searing invasion of light. The stars vanish, not fading, but wiped away as if by a great hand. Your celestial map is rolled up for the day, and you are left with the sun, a brilliant, tyrannical coin hammered into the blue metal of the sky. This is not the gentle, dappled sun of forests or meadows. This is the desert sun, a navigational instrument of brutal, unambiguous power. Your night school of stars is over, day school is in session, and the teacher is merciless. You learn to navigate by its arc, a slow, scorching path from one horizon to the other. You don't have a watch. You have your shadow. As the sun climbs, you notice it, a stubby, dark companion glued to your feet, shrinking with every passing moment. The Bedouin developed an intimate, bodily understanding of solar time. The length and direction of your shadow told you not just the hour, but your latitude and the season. At its shortest, when the shadow is a mere puddle around your sandals, you know it's midday, Ulzor, the time to seek what meager shade exists and rest, conserving the water your body is desperately trying not to evaporate. But navigationally, the shadow's morning and afternoon directions are your east-west baselines. You learn to judge your heading by keeping the sun at a consistent angle to your body, say, over your right shoulder in the morning to travel south, feeling its heat shift across your back as the day wears on, a slow, thermal compass. But the sun's lesson is harsher than just light and shadow. It teaches you about stone. You begin to notice that rocks aren't just randomly scattered. On the windward side of a hill, they might be smoother, polished by millennia of sandblasting. On the leeward side, they might be pitted and sharper. But there's more. In certain areas, you see piles of stone, not natural, but deliberate. These are ul-alamat or regem, cairns built by generations of travelers. But they aren't just piles. A skilled guide would build them with a specific, subtle shape. One stone tilted to indicate the direction of the next water, a flat capstone meaning the well is full, a missing stone meaning it's dry. It was a stone language, a slow message board for those who could read it. You also learned that some rocks, dark basalt ones, absorb the sun's heat so intensely during the day that they create tiny, localized thermal updrafts. At dusk, hawks will circle above them, using the last warmth to gain altitude, a signpost of a specific rock in an ocean of sand. Here's a mainstream historical fact. This solar and stone method of wayfinding wasn't guesswork. It connected to the broader Arab and Islamic scientific tradition of astronomy and geometry. The concept of the gnomon, a stick whose shadow tells time, was known and used. More advanced travelers might have employed a simple camel, a wooden card on a knotted string, to measure the sun's altitude and thus estimate latitude. But the core skill remained profoundly physical, a deep, embodied sense of the sun's relationship to the earthly horizon and one's own body. The Sunstone legend. Some old caravan tales speak of certain translucent pieces of felspar or quartz that could be held up to the sun on a completely overcast day. The crystal, it was said, would polarize the scattered light and reveal the sun's hidden position, giving a rough bearing even when the orb itself was veiled. While this sounds like Viking sunstone lore, there are fragmentary references in some medieval Arab geographical texts to seeing stones, used by desert guides. Historians dismiss it as myth, but material scientists note that certain crystals from the region do exhibit polarizing properties. Was it a real tool, or just a beautiful story born from wishful thinking? The desert keeps that secret. Historians still argue whether these daytime methods were reliable enough for primary navigation or were merely supplements to the stellar map. The truth is, they were part of a continuous loop of observation. The stars gave you your true bearing at night. The sun and shadows helped you maintain that bearing during the day, while the stones and the landscape itself warned of local obstacles or confirmed you were on a known, if invisible, path. You learned to constantly cross-reference. That distant, shimmering line of hills should be on your left by mid-morning if your star-derived course was correct. If it isn't, you pause, you reassess. The desert doesn't give second chances to the arrogant. So you walk, your world reduced to the crunch of grit, the feel of the sun on your left cheek, the precise length of the shadows stretching ahead of you. It's a slower, more meditative kind of travel than the night stargazing. It's about patience and minute correction. You are a sailor on a sea of light, steering by the furnace in the sky and the silent, sun-baked scribbles of those who walked here before you, written not in ink, but in piled stone and weathered rock. And as the sun begins its final, glorious plunge, painting the dunes in impossible shades of orange and purple, you feel a shift in the air. A new teacher is about to rise, not from the sky, but from the landscape itself. The wind, which has been a silent antagonist all day, is stirring, ready to speak its own cryptic language. As the sun drowns in a pool of its own fire, the temperature plummets, and the desert exhales. The wind, which was a blunt, baking force during the day, now becomes something else. A whisperer, a sculptor, a carrier of secrets. You stop, close your eyes, and turn your face into it. This is not a random breeze. It has a name, a character, and a story. The shamal blows from the north, steady and cool, often carrying the faint, clean scent of distant Mediterranean hills. The cause comes from the south, hotter, dustier, sometimes hinting at the salt pans of the empty quarter's heart. You are learning the language of the wind, a vocabulary written in touch and smell and sound. You listen first. The wind over different dune shapes produces different tones. A low hum over a gradual slope, a sharper whistle as it cuts across a sharp crest. A change in that tone ahead might signal a change in terrain, a hidden drop-off, a valley, a field of harder sapka crust. Then you watch. The sand itself is the wind's canvas. The surface isn't smooth, it's etched with tiny ripples called ripples. Even science uses the poetic term. These ripples always form perpendicular to the wind's direction. A quick glance down tells you the prevailing wind of the last few hours, giving you a cross-check on your bearing. But you look for more dramatic scripts. A dune's shape is a history book of wind. The gentle, windward slope, the steep, curving slip face on the lee side. This tells you the dominant wind direction over seasons. If you see older, smaller dunes riding on the back of a megadune but aligned slightly differently, it speaks of a seasonal shift in wind patterns. You're not just walking on sand, you're walking on frozen wind. Now you use your nose. This sounds absurd in a place supposedly devoid of scent, but your senses have sharpened. The wind can carry the faintest signatures for miles. The subtle, green tang of a hidden wadi where plants cling to life. The sharp, mineral smell of a gypsum crust. And most prized of all, the impossibly distant, wet earth smell of Raba, a place where rainwater has recently pooled just below the surface. You might smell it long before any visible sign appears on the horizon. Some guides claimed they could smell a particular type of acacia tree from over a dune range, its resinous sweet, woody pin on the olfactory map. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Bedouins' wind literacy was critical for survival beyond navigation. Predicting the simoom or samum, the poisonous, suffocating sandstorm, was a life or death skill. They watched for specific signs: a sudden, dead calm, a copper-colored haze on the horizon, a rapid drop in barometric pressure felt in the ears. Specific cloud formations at dawn, like the mare's tails, could foretell wind shifts days in advance. This knowledge was embedded in poetry. When the wind blows from the direction of Najd, prepare your tent ropes. It was practical meteorology encoded in cultural memory. The most valuable thing the wind could bring wasn't a smell, but a taste. In the deep desert, there are places where ancient seabeds have left deposits of salt. A certain dry, tangy taste on the wind, especially after a rare rain had dampened the crust, could lead a guide to these salt pans. Salt was currency, medicine, and a vital nutrient for both humans and camels on long journeys. Finding a salt deposit was like stumbling upon a bank vault in the wilderness. Other times, the wind carried the taste of something ominous: the flat, metallic flavor of a distant electrical storm, or the chalky, suffocating taste of an approaching dust plume that meant you had minutes to cover your face and seek what shelter you could. Historians still argue whether this sensory navigation was a teachable science or an almost shamanistic, innate gift possessed by only the greatest guides. Could anyone learn to taste water on the wind, or was it a combination of subliminal clues, a slight cooling, a change in insect activity, that the guide themselves couldn't fully articulate? The line between profound skill and mystical intuition is blurred in the desert's archive. You stand there, a living sensor array, integrating the data stream, the wind's pressure on your right ear, the whispered song through the dune grass at your feet, the faint, promising coolness and hint of something, almost vegetal, carried from the east. You adjust your path a few degrees. The stars will confirm it later, but for now, you trust the breath of the desert. It's talking to you. And as the last light fades, you realize you are not alone in this interpretation. A soft grunt comes from beside you. Your camel, chewing its cud with a look of profound boredom, shifts its weight. You've been relying on your own human senses, but you're traveling with a creature whose perception of this world is alien, ancient, and far more acute. Its instincts are about to become your most reliable guide, and its needs will dictate the rhythm of your very survival. In the deepening twilight, your camel, let's call her Thuraya, after the star cluster, lets out a long, guttural sigh that ends in a bubbling snort. You've been deciphering the wind, but she's been reading the oath itself through the soft, leathery pads of her feet. You are the navigator with your stars and theories, but she is the engine, the cargo hold, and the early warning system. Your survival is now a partnership with this prehistoric-looking creature, and you must learn to listen to her secret wisdom. Her biology is a marvel of desert engineering, a fact any mainstream biology textbook will celebrate. Those iconic humps aren't water sacs. They are fat reserves, insulation against heat, and a metabolic battery that can be converted into both energy and water when needed. Her red blood cells are oval, not round, allowing her blood to flow even when she's dehydrated and her body fluids have thickened to syrup. She can lose 25% of her body weight in water and survive, a loss that would kill you 3 times over. When she finally drinks, she can down over 200 liters in 3 minutes, storing it not in a hump, but in the water-rich lining of her stomach and her bloodstream. But her real navigation secrets are subtler. You learn to watch her ears. They are independent satellite dishes, constantly swiveling, parsing sounds far below and above your hearing range. A sudden forward focus and stiffening might mean she's heard the jingle of another caravan's bells over the next dune ridge, long before you see it. A flattening back against her skull isn't just annoyance. It can signal she sensed the subsonic vibration of a distant landslide or the approach of a large predator, a wolf, or in ancient times, perhaps a lion. Her sense of smell is similarly legendary. She can detect water sources over 5 miles away. You'll see her lift her head, nostrils flaring like soft, slitted bells, and then she'll simply start walking with a new, determined pace. Arguing is pointless. You follow. She's not guessing, she's homing in on a scent plume of moisture carried on the air or rising from a hidden aquifer. Her pace is your clock. The famous ship of the desert sails at a steady, energy-efficient 5 kilometers per hour, a pace she can maintain for hours without apparent fatigue. You learn to measure distances in camel days, not miles. Many guides believed their lead camels possessed a form of topographic memory that bordered on the supernatural. A camel that had traveled a route once, even years before, could allegedly retrace it with uncanny accuracy, especially when nearing a familiar well or grazing ground. Was it memory of specific rock formations sensed through footfall? An internal map of smells? Or something else? There are old caravan stories of a blind camel leading a lost train back to safety, trusting feet and nose where eyes were useless. Science calls it associative memory and keen senses. The Bedouin often spoke of it with a respect that verged on reverence. Historians still argue whether the camel's domestication in Arabia around 1000 BCE was the single most important technological revolution for desert travel, or if its impact is overstated compared to the gradual refinement of water-carrying skins and star lore. But there's no debate on the symbiotic relationship. Your life depends on her well-being. You learn to read the signs of her health with more care than your own. The firmness of her hump, soft means she's hungry. The clarity of her eyes, the texture of her coat. You spend hours at dusk picking the burrs and ticks from her thick fur, a grooming ritual that is both practical care and a bonding exercise. You mutter to her, share your water with her in critical moments, and in return, she carries your world. Your tent, your food, your trade goods, your very hope of reaching the next oasis. And she teaches you about time. Her needs dictate the rhythm of the march. You travel in the cool hours of early morning and late afternoon, resting during the inferno of midday. Her grazing time, when you find sparse patches of arfage or tamam grass, becomes your time to mend gear, study the next stretch of stars, or simply sleep. She is a slow, deliberate, living metronome, beating out the patient tempo of desert survival. In your modern life, you fight time, cramming more into every minute. Out here, with Thuraya, you surrender to it. You move at the pace of biology, of digestion, of the sun's arc and the camel's steady, plodding gait. As night fully embraces you, you make camp. You unload her, and she immediately folds her knobbly knees, sinking to the sand with a contented groan. You sit beside her, leaning against the warm, furry bulk of her flank. The shared body heat is a blessing against the chilling air. Looking up at the re-emerging stars, you realize your navigation has become a tripartite conversation. Your eyes on the heavens, your skin feeling the wind, and your trust in this ancient creature beside you, who reads the story of the desert written in vibrations and scents you will never perceive. Tomorrow's path will be chosen not just by you, but by her nostrils, her ears, and the memory in her feet. You are not a master commanding a beast. You are one half of a partnership, adrift in a beautiful, brutal sea, relying on the gentle, ancient wisdom of the other. The dawn light returns, not with the sharp clarity of yesterday, but through a thin, high haze that turns the sun into a pale silver coin. You've been trusting the grand markers, stars, sun, camel. But now, as you pack camp and Thuraya grumbles to her feet, you begin to see the finer print. The desert you once saw as a blank, repetitive canvas reveals itself as a palimpsest, a parchment scraped clean and written over again and again, with the faint ghosts of previous messages still visible beneath the surface. Your job is to read this loud text. You start with the most obvious ghost, the path itself. It's not a road. There is no worn dirt, no signpost. But if you know how to look, you see the Zubala, the caravan trail. It's a subtle series of cues, a slightly more compacted line of sand where thousands of camel feet have tamped it down over centuries, visible only at a low angle in the raking morning light. Scattered along it, you might find the occasional, sun-bleached camel bone, placed upright in the sand by a passing traveler as a marker for those behind. More somberly, you might see a small, neat cairn of stones, a grave. Each one is a story and a warning. Someone didn't make it to the next well. Their resting place, however, becomes a known point, a somber but fixed coordinate on the mental map. You learn to read the vegetation, not as a green signpost, green is a fantasy out here, but as a dry, brown code. The distribution of certain plants forms a hidden map of the water table. A line of gaff or salam trees, even leafless, indicates the subsurface course of an ancient, buried river channel, a wadi. Their roots might be tapping water 50 feet down. A sudden cluster of the hardy ushar shrub often means there's a shallow, saline seep nearby, not for drinking, but a sign that water is close to the surface, and with a careful dig in the right spot, you might find sweeter water filtering through. The plants are the desert's own divining rods, their very existence shouting secrets about what lies beneath. Then there are the stones. Beyond the deliberate cairns, the natural rocks tell a story of passage. You find flat stones stacked in threes, not casual, but a deliberate signal meaning good camping ahead, sheltered. A black stone placed on top of a white one at a fork in an invisible path might indicate the more difficult but safer route. Historians still argue whether there was a unified, formal code of stone markers across the whole Arabian desert, or if it was a patchwork of local dialects understood only by specific tribes. The evidence suggests the latter. Part of a guide's expertise was knowing the local stone language of the region he was traversing. Here's a mainstream historical fact that connects this to the wider world. These subtle paths weren't just for random wandering. They were arteries of the incense trade. The frankincense and myrrh trees grew in specific, limited regions of southern Arabia, modern-day Oman and Yemen. The precious resin had to be carried north to markets in Gaza, Petra, and Damascus. The routes they took, avoiding mountains, skirting enemy territories, linking one tiny, reliable well to the next, were the superhighways of their day, maintained not by engineers but by generations of foot and hoof reading the land's subtle signs. The wealth of kingdoms flowed along these barely visible tracks. Some of the oldest markers aren't stones or bones, but art. In certain areas, you can find petroglyphs, etchings on rock faces depicting camels, oryx, and human figures. While often seen as ancient doodles, some researchers, like the fringe theorist you are about to meet in your mind, propose they served a navigational purpose. A specific style of camel depiction, with one leg raised, might indicate the direction to a pass. A cluster of human figures with arms pointing could signal a meeting place or a warning. It's a controversial idea. Most archaeologists see them as ritual or artistic expressions. But in a landscape where every meaningful mark survives for millennia, wouldn't it make sense to turn wayfinding into durable art? You look at a stylized antelope carved on a cliff beside a dry wash and wonder, is this beautiful, or is it an ancient sign saying good hunting for 3 days west? As the morning wears on, your perception has shifted. You're no longer walking across a monescape. You're walking through a library. Every weathered rock, every arrangement of pebbles, every stubborn, thorny plant in a vast emptiness is a word, a sentence, a paragraph in a long, continuous story of crossing and survival. The desert is not featureless. It is dense with information, written in a language of resilience. You feel a connection to the countless others who have walked here, their needs and fears and discoveries embedded in the very geology. Their maps weren't drawn, they were lived, and then left in the placement of a stone, the path of a root, the faint compaction of sand. And as the sun climbs higher, softening the shadows that reveal these secrets, you realize this living map needs a living memory to store it. You can't carry parchment that would bleach and crumble. You must carry the map inside you, in the most durable, portable format known to humankind, poetry and song. The high sun washes out the subtle shadows that revealed the old path, and the land once again threatens to become a shimmering blank. But you don't panic. You don't pull out a chart. Instead, you settle into the rhythm of Theraya's walk, and you begin to hum. It starts as a low drone, matching her pace. Then words form. They are not your words. They are older, passed from the lips of your grandfather to your father, from the guide to the apprentice, in the precious cool of countless evenings. You are reciting Al-Qasida, the long, narrative odes that are your people's living atlas. This is how the vast map is stored and transmitted. The poetry isn't about love or war, though it contains those, too. It is technical literature in rhythmic form. A single, memoized poem might describe a journey from Nage to Damascus. It won't say head 320 degrees for 200 kilometers. It will say, we departed from the well of Tharmada with the Pleiades high, and pressed on past the two hills that stand like guards' shoulders, till we made camp where the acacia's roots grip the black stone. Each line is a waypoint. The stars provide the timing. The landmark, the twin hills, the black stone, provides the location. The specific acacia tree might be the only one for 50 miles in any direction. The poem encodes turning points, water sources, hazards, and distances measured in days' travel under specific conditions. You learn these poems through relentless, rhythmic repetition, often set to the simple beat of a hand on a drum or the clop of a camel's foot. The meter itself becomes a mnemonic, the cadence of the journey locked into the cadence of the vows. Your brain becomes a storeroom of sonic roots. A skilled Khalid could recite for hours, unfolding an entire region's geography from memory alone. This was a fiercely protected knowledge. A tribe's repertoire of root poems was intellectual property as valuable as its herds. Giving a daughter in marriage to another tribe sometimes included, as part of the dowry, the sharing of a specific poem, a root, thus weaving new paths of knowledge and alliance into the social fabric. Here's a mainstream historical fact. This oral cartography was remarkably accurate. When early Western explorers like Charles Montague Doughty and T. Lawrence began traveling with Bedouin guides in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they were astonished to find that the distances and directions given in poetry, when carefully transcribed and compared to later surveys, were often spot on. The poems weren't just pretty, they were functionally precise, compressing gigabytes of navigational data into an elegant, error-resistant oral file format. They were the cloud storage of their day, backed up in every traveler's mind. The Whispering Dunes poems. Some of the oldest, most cryptic odes reference not just what you see, but what you hear. There are lines that speak of the mountain that sighs when the shamal dies, or the valley that answers your call with 3. 4 generations. Scholars dismissed these as pure metaphor. But in certain specific, acoustically peculiar deserts, like the Al-Hassa region, there are dunes and canyons that indeed produce strange sonic phenomena. A particular dune might emit a booming hum when the wind stops suddenly, creating a natural auditory beacon. A cliff face might create a perfect triple echo. These rare acoustic landmarks, incredibly reliable because they are based on immutable geology, would be worth encoding in the most sacred of root poems. It suggests the navigational system included not just sight, but a full-body sensory engagement with the landscape's personality. Historians still argue whether this oral tradition was finally killed by the spread of literacy and printed maps, or if it simply retreated, becoming a cultural art form stripped of its vital practicality. The truth is probably a sad blend. A poem that once guided a caravan to survival became a nostalgic recitation at a wedding. The specific acacia tree died, and no one needed to find the black stone anymore, because a truck with a satellite phone could just drive cross-country. But for you, here and now, the poem is everything. As you recite the verses, the landscape begins to match the lyrics. There, on the horizon, are the two hills like guards' shoulders. A thrill of recognition passes through you, not just at the sight, but at the confirmation of a 1,000-year-old word. You are walking in a literal songline, your physical journey an enactment of a verbal melody. The desert is no longer silent, it is narrated. Every feature is a line in a stanza, every day's travel a verse in an epic that has no true end, only pauses. And as you chant, you realize this practice does more than guide your body. It steadies your mind. It fills the vast, potentially terrifying emptiness with the human voice, with memory, with the comforting presence of all the ancestors who said these same words on this same sand. The real journey, you start to understand, isn't just across space. It's a journey into a state of mind, a psychological fortress you must build dune by dune, against the immense, crushing patience of the void itself. The poem's rhythm fills your mind, but the silence of the desert presses back. You've walked for days where the only changes are the slow shift of shadows and the gradual weariness in your legs. The initial thrill of star-finding and wind-reading has settled into a deep, monotonous grind. This is the true test. the one the poetry can't fully prepare you for, the psychology of the long walk. Navigation now becomes an internal game, a battle against the mind's own treacherous landscapes. You first confront the illusion of progress. On a featureless plain or a repetitive dune field, you can walk for hours and feel you've moved nowhere. The horizon recedes at the same pace you advance. This is where you must divorce your sense of achievement from visual confirmation. You learn to trust the internal metrics, the number of steps you've counted, a common meditative practice, the completion of a recited poem, the steady depletion of your water skin by measured sips. Progress is no longer something you see, it's something you log, like a pilot flying over open ocean with only instruments. You fight the urge to constantly look up, to search for a landmark that isn't there. You focus instead on the microgeography, the pattern of a single square meter of sand at your feet, the slow dance of a sun-bleached beetle. This hyperfocus on the immediate is a defense against the despair of the infinite. Then comes the mind's mischief. In the profound sensory deprivation, no trees, no birds, no change in sound, your brain, desperate for input, starts to generate its own. You might hear faint, phantom voices in the wind. You might see shapes in the peripheral haze that resolve into nothing when you turn your head. The old guides had a name for this, Jathum, a pressing feeling of being watched or followed by an unseen presence. It's not a jinn story, it's a recognized psychological effect of isolation. The strategy against it is ritual. You might have a specific, meaningless little task you perform at each rest stop, tying a particular knot in your camel's lead rope, arranging 3 pebbles in a triangle, a tiny, conscious act that reaffirms your control and grounds you in the tangible present. Here's a mainstream historical fact that underscores this mental battle. Many early European explorers who ventured into deserts with just local guides but without the deep cultural conditioning documented episodes of intense hallucination, paranoia, and even madness. Their writings are filled with descriptions of fever dreams and a crushing melancholy of the desert. The Bedouin, through a culture born in this environment, had institutionalized the coping mechanisms. The very structure of their travel, the strict time for silent walking, the time for communal tea and talk at rest, the recitation of poetry, was a psychological hygiene routine, a way to compartmentalize the vastness into manageable, ritualized chunks. There's the concept of desert time or camel time. Beyond just moving at the camel's pace, it refers to a cognitive state where linear, clock-based time dissolves. You stop thinking in terms of hours to destination, and start existing in a perpetual, rolling present. Past and future become abstract, only the next step, the next breath, the next sip of water is real. Some anthropologists suggest this state, akin to a meditative flow or a mild, sustained dissociative state, was actually the optimal mental operating system for the environment. It allowed the traveler to conserve the mental energy usually spent on anticipation and regret, and to fully merge with the rhythmic, timeless reality of the journey itself. It wasn't boredom, it was a form of deep, mindful trance. Historians still argue whether the greatest navigators were those with the sharpest eyes or those with the most resilient psyches. Was wayfinding 10% astronomy and 90% stubbornness? The records of failed journeys, the bones in cairns, suggest the mind broke long before the body gave out. The successful guide was therefore also a shepherd of morale, for himself and his companions. He knew when to tell a joke, usually at the expense of a distant, rival tribe, when to share a rare piece of dried fruit as a surprise, when to point out a tiny, beautiful thing, a perfectly formed crystal of quartz, a single, defiant flower, to remind everyone that the desert wasn't just a wasteland, but a place that could still offer moments of stark, singular beauty. You feel this shift happening within you. The anxiety of the first days, the frantic need to know where you are, softens. You enter the camel time, Your world narrows to the circle of your own existence and expands to fill the entire cosmos in the same moment. You are both insignificantly small and profoundly connected to everything you see. This mental recalibration is the final, most gentle strategy. You don't conquer the distance, you make peace with it. You become part of the slowness, part of the silence. And it is in this state of receptive, patient clarity that the desert plays its cruelest trick, or offers its sweetest reward. For on the horizon, ahead of you, you see something impossible. Trees. A pool of blue water. A lush, green haven. Your heart leaps. But Thoraya, your camel, doesn't even lift her head. She's seen this show before. She knows you're about to learn the most important, and most humiliating, lesson of all. Your heart, sluggish from days in camel time, gives a painful, hopeful lurch. There, maybe 3 miles ahead, is a lake. You can see the shimmering blue surface, the dark, inviting line of palm trees along its shore, their fronds ruffled by a gentle breeze. A rush of saliva floods your dry mouth. You almost quicken your pace, but a grunt from Thoraya stops you. She plods on, utterly uninterested. You look again, and something feels off. The lake sits above the horizon line, not below it. The palms seem to waver, their trunks indistinct. This isn't an oasis. It's a sarab, a mirage. The desert's most famous and most merciless joke. You've encountered the lesser sarab before, the shimmering heat haze that makes distant rocks look like they're dancing on a stove. But this is the full-blown Fata Morgana, a complex superior mirage named after the enchantress Morgan Le Fay for its trickery. It's not a hallucination of a tired mind, it's a real optical phenomenon, a lensing of light through layers of air at drastically different temperatures. The cold, dense air near the sand acts as a mirror, bending light from a patch of sky or a distant, real but unseen landscape, and projecting it as a coherent, tantalizing image ahead of you. It's a perfect illusion, and your survival depends on learning to see through it. The first lesson is suspicion. Anything that appears above the true horizon is immediately suspect. Real objects rise from the ground, mirages often float. The second is stability. A real oasis will have defined, steady edges. A mirage will shimmer and pulse, its details melting and reforming like a watery reflection. You learn to squint, to look slightly away using your peripheral vision, which is sometimes less fooled by the brain's pattern-seeking center. You might drop to one knee, lowering your line of sight to see if the image changes or disappears. The old guides had another trick. They would watch the behavior of birds. A true oasis attracts life. You'd see birds flying toward it, circling, landing. A mirage is silent and lifeless, a beautiful ghost. Here's a mainstream scientific fact about this gentle strategy. The understanding of mirages wasn't just folk wisdom. It was among the early studies of optics. The great 11th century Arab scientist Ibn al-Haytham, al-Hazan, in his Book of Optics, provided some of the first rigorous explanations for atmospheric refraction, including mirages. He described how light bends when passing through layers of air of different density, essentially laying the groundwork for understanding why the desert deceives the eye. So while the Bedouin developed the practical, life-saving skills to detect them, scholars in Baghdad and Cairo were working out the precise mathematics of the illusion. There are old caravan tales of mirage maps. The idea was that certain, rare types of mirages didn't just show random lakes, but actually reflected real geography from far beyond the horizon. A legendary guide, the stories go, could recognize the specific distorted reflection of a known mountain range or a distinctive rock formation that lay 100 miles away, using the mirage not as a trap, but as a periscope to see over the Earth's curve. It's a beautiful idea, turning the desert's trickery into a tool, and while physicists dismiss it as implausible, the distortion is too chaotic. It speaks to the human desire to find utility and meaning even in deception. Historians still argue whether mirages caused more deaths directly, by luring travelers off course to their deaths, or indirectly, by the despair they induced. To trek for hours towards salvation, only to have it melt into more blistering sand, could break a spirit already frayed by thirst and isolation. The psychological crash after a mirage fade could be more deadly than the physical D2. This is why the mental training of the long walk was critical. The resilient, Camel-time mind was less likely to surge with irrational hope and thus less devastated when the hope proved false. You stand still, watching the phantom lake dance and gleam. You employ your checks. It shimmers violently. No birds. Its base is disconnected from the ground. You let out a long, slow breath, the initial excitement replaced by a wry respect for the desert's artistry. It's a stunning fake. You even manage a dry chuckle. You've passed the test. You don't waste energy chasing a dream. You take a careful bearing on a distant, non-mirage rock formation to your left, confirming your true position, and you urge Thuraya forward, skirting the beautiful nothingness. As you walk, the mirage finally fades, sucked back into the heat waves from which it came. The landscape returns to its honest, barren self. But the experience has sharpened you. Your eyes are now calibrated. You look at the world with a skeptical, scientific affection. And hours later, when you smell a faint, true dampness on a shift of the wind, and Thuraya's head comes up with purpose, you know this is different. This isn't a visual promise, it's a scent, a behavioral clue. The reality, when you finally crest a rise and see the small, muddy waterhole and a few scrubby palms, is humble, brown, and utterly beautiful in its truth. It's not a glittering lake. It's a puddle of life. And as you approach, you see signs you're not the first here today. The tracks of others, recent, circle the water. The desert, you remember, isn't empty. It's a network of isolated nodes, and you're about to enter the ancient, unspoken web of desert diplomacy. The waterhole is a rough, brown eye staring up at the sky, fringed with the muddy footprints of animals and the ashy remnants of old fires. It's not paradise, but it's life. And as you and Thuraya drink deeply, you become aware you're being watched. Not with hostility, but with a calm, measured assessment. From behind a rock 50 paces away, a man rises. He is dressed much like you, lean and dust-colored. He doesn't wave. He simply raises an open hand, palm forward. You do the same. This is the first law of the desert, the greeting of peace. You have just entered a zone governed by silent trade and unwritten codes, a diplomacy as refined and necessary as the navigation that brought you here. You approach, but not directly. You angle your path to stop a polite distance from his small, solitary camp. Words aren't your first exchange. You kneel and begin to unpack your fire-making materials. He watches for a moment, then nods slightly and turns to fetch more of the scarce, dry brush for fuel. The sharing of a fire, or the materials to make one, is the second law. It signals non-aggression and a willingness to share space. Only once the small flame is crackling, and you've set your battered coffee pot at its edge, do you speak. The greeting is formal, a series of ritualized inquiries about each other's health and tribe, tracing lineage to find a common ancestor or a known ally. You are not friends, you are potential allies in the business of survival. Your Kabila and his might be in a state of gazu, a feud. But here, at the water, a temporary truce, hudna, is automatically in effect. The well is neutral ground. This is where silent trade often happens. You might have dates, he might have salt. As the bitter, cardamom-scented coffee boils, you might simply lay a small bundle of your goods beside you. He might look at it, then lay a bundle of his own a little closer to the fire. No haggling, no speech. If the amounts seem fair, you each take the other's bundle. If not, you might add a few more dates to your pile, or he might take back a piece of salt. The transaction is conducted in near silence, with gestures and nods. It avoids the potential for offense or misunderstanding that words could bring. It's commerce stripped to its essentials, built on a foundation of mutual need and the understanding that cheating here, at a life-giving node, would be a sin against the desert itself. Here's a mainstream historical fact. This system of desert diplomacy and silent barter wasn't just a Bedouin quirk. It was observed for millennia across the Sahara, the Gobi, and other extreme environments. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote of silent trade between the Carthaginians and African tribes on the west coast. It emerges wherever rare resources meet in places too harsh for permanent markets or where linguistic and cultural differences make verbal negotiation perilous. The desert amplified and perfected it. The code of hospitality, diafa, was so sacred that a host was obligated to protect a guest for 3 days and nights, even if that guest was from a blood-feud enemy. To violate this was to lose all honor, a fate worse than death in a culture where social standing was the only permanent capital. There was the concept of the neutral fool. Sometimes, a traveler would be accompanied by a person with a cognitive disability or a very young child. This person, outside the normal rules of tribal feud and adult responsibility, could act as an intermediary. They could walk into the camp of a hostile tribe to ask for water or information, protected by their status. Their words were not considered binding, their presence not a provocation. It was a humane, ingenious loophole in the rigid code, ensuring that even in times of conflict, the absolute basics of survival could sometimes be negotiated. It was a gentle strategy indeed, built on the recognition of shared vulnerability. Historians still argue whether this intricate social system was ultimately a force for peace, creating stable rules for interaction in a lawless space, or if it simply ritualized conflict, with feuds, lasting generations and governed by their own brutal etiquette. The poetry is full of both, odes to glorious, vengeful raids and poems praising the boundless generosity of a host who gave his last camel to a stranger. The desert demanded both extremes, the fierce protection of one's own scarce resources and the profound understanding that today's stranger might be tomorrow's lifeline. You share the coffee, pouring the tiny, potent cups in the proper order. You exchange names of recent wells, which are dry, which are holding. This is vital intelligence trading. He mentions a salmon that passed to the east 2 days ago, which explains the strange haze. You mention a patch of good grazing you passed a day's journey back. The conversation is a mutual updating of the living map. Then, as the dusk settles, he points to a specific star just above the horizon. When that one clears the ridge, he says, it will be safe to cross the Ramlat ahead. The wind has firmed the sand. This isn't just advice, it's a gift. A piece of his own hard-won, localized knowledge, given freely because you shared coffee and fire. You thank him, not effusively, but with a grave nod that carries the weight of a contract. In the morning, you depart in opposite directions. No farewells. You simply break camp, raise a hand, and turn your back, trusting he will do the same. The interaction was frictionless, efficient, and deeply civilized. You carry away more than refilled water skins. You carry a renewed faith in the invisible network that holds this vast emptiness together, a web of whispered laws, silent trades, and pinpoint gestures of trust that make the desert not a howling wilderness, but a society with its own gentle, unwavering grammar. Your path now leads you toward where that society concentrates, where these invisible threads weave together into the great, bustling, smelly, glorious arteries of commerce, the frankincense highway. The solitary, silent exchange at the waterhole was a single thread. Now, as you travel north and west, you begin to see other threads converging. A set of tracks joins yours from the east, then another from the south. The subtle Zubala path underfoot widens, becomes a road worn not just by time but by the weight of empires. The air changes, too. It carries new scents. The dry, clean smell of sand is undercut by the musky, sweet pungent aroma of animal sweat, of spices, and above all, of oluban, frankincense. You have merged onto the main channel. You are now walking the Tariq Oluban, the frankincense highway, one of the most lucrative and perilous trade routes in human history. The scale of operation hits you. Your solitary camel is suddenly part of a long, strung-out caravan of hundreds, maybe thousands, of animals. The quiet is shattered by the deep bells of led camels, the shouts of drovers, the creak of laden saddles. The cargo is astonishingly light by volume, devastatingly heavy by value. sacks of frankincense tears, the solidified, aromatic resin of the Boswellia sacra tree, and jars of myrrh. This isn't just perfume. It's ritual incense for temples from Rome to Babylon, medicine, embalming unguent, and a status symbol bound in the homes of the impossibly wealthy. By weight, it was worth more than gold. Protecting this scent, this smoke, is why you're here. You're not just a navigator now, you're a security detail, a logistician, and a diplomat moving a bank vault on the hoof. Your gentle strategies become matters of high-stakes economics. The route is no longer a secret of your tribe, it's a known commercial secret guarded by kingdoms. You must hit the wells with precision, because a caravan this size can drain a small well in hours. Timing is everything. You must arrive at the great caravanserais, the fortified resting stations like Kana or Shabwar, at the right phase of the moon to coordinate with market schedules and tax collectors. Your knowledge of the stars now syncs with a mercantile calendar. A delay caused by a misread dune or a stubborn mirage isn't just an inconvenience. It's a financial disaster that could collapse a trade deal or cause you to miss the protective wing of a royal escort through dangerous territory. Here's a mainstream historical fact to weigh this journey. The frankincense trade was the foundation of legendary South Arabian kingdoms like the Nabateans, with their capital at Petra, and the Sabaeans, of Queen of Sheba fame. The Romans, who adored the incense, called the region Arabia Felix, Happy Arabia, because of this wealth. Pliny the Elder grumbled that the trade siphoned over 100 million sesterces a year from Rome's coffers. This wealth built Petra's facades carved from rose-red rock and the Great Marib Dam in Yemen. Every step you take on this route walks over the ghosts of merchant princes and the dreams of emperors. The greatest threat to the cargo wasn't always bandits or sandstorms. It was boredom. Specifically, the boredom of the camels. Frankincense has a strong, resinous smell that, over weeks of travel, could apparently become monotonous even to a camel. There are apocryphal accounts from later medieval traders that if the scent sacks weren't carefully secured and occasionally masked with other smells, like bundles of strong herbs, the camels, seeking novel sensory input, might try to eat the frankincense. Given its value, a camel with an expensive cud was a crisis. Some tales speak of guards whose sole job was to walk alongside the scent camels, swatting their noses away from the precious sacks, a bizarre intersection of animal psychology and high finance. Historians still argue whether these long-distance caravans were run by centralized states or by loose, shifting confederations of tribal groups who each controlled and guided the route through their own territory. Was it a single, organized corporation, or a relay race where knowledge and protection were handed off like a baton at tribal borders? The evidence points to the relay. Your role as a Khalid might only cover a specific, 200-mile stretch, the stretch your tribe had memoized in poetry and blood. At a certain well, you'd hand over the lead camel's rope to a guide from the next tribe, who knew the whispers of the next desert section. It was a decentralized, trust-based network, the original blockchain of safe passage. You move through this organized chaos, your senses overwhelmed. The night sky is the same, but now 100 campfires dot the plain below, and the stars have to compete with the flame-lit faces of men from a dozen tribes and tongues. The poetry you recite is now checked against the shared knowledge of 100 other guides. Your gentle art of wayfinding is the engine of a brutal, beautiful machine of globalization. The emptiness is gone, replaced by a moving city of sweat, spice, and purpose. You feel the weight of the world's desire on your shoulders. And just as you grow accustomed to the noise and the smell and the collective rhythm, the desert reminds you it is still the boss. The horizon to the north turns a bruised, yellowish brown. The wind dies suddenly, and an oppressive stillness falls. The lead camels stop without command, their bells falling silent. Every seasoned traveler knows the look. The gentle strategies are about to be tested by raw, obliterating fury. The Samum is coming, and it will blot out the world. The silence is the first warning. The constant low sigh of the wind, the rustle of gear, the murmur of the caravan, it all vanishes, swallowed by a thick, hot stillness that presses on your eardrums. The sky to the north isn't just hazy, it's an advancing wall of dun-colored chalk, swallowing the light. It doesn't roll like a cloud, it devours. This is the Samum, the poison wind. Not a sandstorm, but the sandstorm, the one the poems warn about in terrified whispers. Your gentle strategies of stars and stones are useless now. For the next several hours, survival is not about navigation, but about existence. You are about to be erased. Chaos erupts in the caravan, but it's a practiced chaos. There's no running. You have minutes. Shouts turn into toasts, rhythmic commands. You and your fellow drovers become a single organism. The camels are forced to kneel, facing away from the coming storm, forming a living windbreak. You scramble to unload the most critical goods, water skins, food, and pile them against the camel's flanks. The priceless frankincense sacks are buried in the center of this makeshift fort. You tie your headscarf, kufiya, tightly over your nose and mouth, donning the agol cord to keep it sealed. You pull your goggles, polished slices of antelope horn or, in later times, smoked glass, over your eyes. The world turns amber. Then you lie down, press yourself against the Raya's warm, solid side, pull your woolen bisht over your entire body, and wait. The wall hits. It's not a gust, it's a change of state. The world turns from air to solid, grinding particles. Sound becomes a roaring, screaming omnipresence, like being inside a jet engine filled with sand. You can't see your own hand in front of your face. The sand finds every gap. It grits in your teeth behind the cloth, needles its way through your wall, piles and drifts against your body. The heat is unbearable, a blasting oven wind that sucks the moisture from your lungs with every breath. This is where the psychology of the long walk meets its ultimate trial. Panic is death. To stand up is to be blinded, disoriented, and lost literally feet from safety. You must become a stone. You must breathe slow, shallow breaths through the wet cloth you hopefully placed over your mouth. You must trust that Thuraya, with her nictitating membranes protecting her eyes and her instinct to tuck her head, will remain your anchor. Here's a mainstream historical fact about this terror. The Samum wasn't just feared for its immediacy. It reshaped landscapes and history. These storms could bury wells forever, erase entire caravan trails, and alter dune fields so completely that a guide's memoized path became a deadly trap. There is scholarly speculation that the decline of certain ancient trade cities wasn't just due to shifting sea routes, but because a changing climate pattern increased the frequency of such storms, slowly strangling the overland arteries. A single storm could wipe out a caravan, creating a buried, sandy Pompeii of commerce and bone that might not be found for millennia. The storm rituals. In the absolute blindness and roar, how do you know time is passing? How do you keep your mind from unraveling? Guides spoke of internal chants, not poetry, but simple, rhythmic phrases or prayers repeated in time with one's heartbeat. Others would focus on a single, vivid memory of a green place, holding it in their mind's eye like a talisman against the brown fury. The most physical ritual involved a length of rope. One end tied to your wrist, the other to the lead camel's harness. Every few minutes, you would give the rope 2 sharp tugs. If you felt 2 tugs back, you knew your camel, and by extension, your lifeline of supplies, was still there. It was a tactile check-in, a silent "I am here," in a world that had erased all other communication. It was a gentle strategy reduced to its most primal form, maintaining connection. Historians still argue whether the greatest loss of life in desert travel came from thirst, getting lost, or these sudden, cataclysmic storms. The truth is they worked in concert. A storm could scatter a caravan, destroy its bearings, and use up its precious water while it hunkered down, leading to death by dislocation days later. The Samum was the ultimate test of a guide's preparation and a group's cohesion. It was the desert's way of resetting the board, of reminding the arrogant that all their knowledge was conditional on its mercy. For what feels like an eternity, there is only the roar, the heat, the grind. You exist in a tiny, dark pocket of self, clinging to the rhythm of your breath and the solid bulk of the animal beside you. You lose all sense of time. The storm could last an hour or 6. You only know it's ending when the roar begins to drop in pitch, from a scream to a howl to a moan. The pressure of the wind lessens. The sand no longer feels like bullets. Finally, there is silence again, but now it's the silence of a world newly born and buried. You push yourself up, a drift of sand cascading from your back. You pull down your kufiya and spit grit. The world is alien. Dunes have moved. Landmarks are gone. The sky is a pale, washed-out blue, the sun a faint silver disk. The caravan is a series of humps in a new desert, slowly stirring. The first task isn't to move forward. It's to dig out, to take stock, to find each other. And then, as the ringing in your ears subsides, comes the harder task, figuring out where in this freshly scrambled world you are. The stars, your oldest friends, are your only hope. But they are many hours away. Until then, you are in limbo, in a landscape that has forgotten itself, and you must trust the deeper, slower memories, not of the land, but of your blood. The footprints have truly faded now. You dig yourself out from the sandy tomb, your muscles protesting. All around, the caravan is doing the same, a scene of slow, gritty resurrection. The landscape you knew is gone. The dune that was your landmark is now a flat plain. The plain is now a new, sharp-crested dune. The Samum has not just passed through, it has rewritten the page. You look at the older guides, the Khalids, and see a new expression on their dust-caked faces. Not fear, but a deep, weary solemnity. They are looking at a book in a language they've spoken all their lives, but someone has shuffled all the paragraphs. This moment, here in the bleached, post-storm silence, is a tiny rehearsal for a much larger ending that is creeping across the desert world. For generations, your knowledge was the only currency that mattered in this emptiness. But as the 20th century dawns, even in the deep desert, you begin to hear whispers of a different world. The first intrusion isn't a map, it's a line. A straight, arbitrary line drawn by men in faraway capitals, using rulers on paper maps that know nothing of wadis or grazing rights. A border. Suddenly, a well your tribe has used for 500 years is in another country. To visit it requires papers, not poetry. Then come the machines. You hear the distant, coughing sputter of a motor, and one day you see a truck, a lurching, metal monster, churning its own path across the Sapka, independent of wells, oblivious to camel days. It carries men with strange, spinning dials, compasses, and printed grids, maps, that reduce the nuanced song of the desert to cold coordinates. They move 10 times faster than you, in air-conditioned bubbles, seeing nothing but their own dust. The final, gentle erosion is the knowledge itself. A young man from your tribe, clever and restless, goes to work on an oil pipeline or in a growing city. He learns to read, but not the stars. He reads manuals and pay stubs. He comes back for a visit, wearing a wristwatch. When you speak of waiting for Ulthurea to rise to start the journey, he nods politely but glances at his watch. The poetry, the long odes you drilled into him as a boy, are forgotten lyrics to a song he no longer needs to sing. The wells are being capped or piped. The ancient caravan routes, with their subtle zubala, are crossed by graded gravel roads for those trucks. Your role, the sacred role of the Khalid, is becoming a ceremonial one, a performance for curious outsiders with cameras, not a vital function for the survival of your people. Here's a mainstream historical fact that marks this transition: the mapping of the Arabian Peninsula by Western powers and later by national governments in the mid-20th century. Projects like the U.S. Army Map Service surveys and the Saudi Arabian Suramco cartographic collaborations finally put the empty spaces on precise, geodetic maps. These maps were tools of state control and resource extraction, oil. For the Bedouin, it was the external imposition of a single, authoritative reality over their light, experimental one. The map claimed to be the territory, and in doing so, it made the ancient, gentle way of knowing the territory seem obsolete, a charming anachronism. The last guide stories. In every region, there is an old man proclaimed, often by journalists or anthropologists, as the last true master of the star paths. They film him pointing to constellations, smiling sadly. But the real loss is more mundane. It's the loss of the middle generation, the people who should be learning the poems now, in their prime. but are instead driving taxis in Riyadh or Dubai. There's a fringe theory, half joking, half tragic, that the only way to preserve this knowledge is to encode it not in new apprentices, but in a different kind of memory, computer algorithms. Could you teach an AI the root poems and the conditional logic of sand and wind? Perhaps. But it would be a ghost in a machine, an echo without the camel's breath, the grit in the teeth, the fear and the triumph. Historians still argue whether this transition was an inevitable tragedy of progress or a form of liberation from a brutally hard life. Did motorized transport and GPS free the Bedouin from a precarious existence, or did it sever a sacred, millennia-old bond with the environment, leading to a cultural dislocation as profound as any physical displacement? There is no simple answer. The old men sitting in the new concrete houses at the edge of the desert, longing for the silence of the dunes, have one answer. Their grandchildren, studying engineering on laptops, have another. You stand in the rearranged desert, the storm's gift. The older Khalid finally nods, not at the horizon, but at the sun. He uses a simple, ancient trick, planting his staff in the sand and marking the tip of its shadow, waiting, marking it again. He has drawn a west-east line on the fresh sand. It's a start. The stars will give the rest tonight. The knowledge still works. It is still true. But the sinking feeling in your gut, deeper than the storm's fear, is the knowledge that this truth is becoming a relic. You are navigating a world that is itself disappearing, your gentle strategies fading like the footprints you leave behind, which the next mild breeze will gently, irrevocably, erase. Yet, as you reburden Thuraya and point her nose toward where you hope the next well still is, you carry something within you, a mindset, a sensory acuity, a way of being in space, that is too profound to simply vanish. It will, you sense, echo in the most unexpected of places, in realms as seemingly disconnected from the desert as the deep sea and the void of space itself. The journey ends, as all desert journeys must, at an oasis that is no longer just a cluster of palms, but a town with satellite dishes and the hum of generators. You've traded your woolen bisht for a synthetic jacket, your camel for a seat in a dusty Land Cruiser. The world you navigated with your whole body now flits by a window. Yet, as you sit in this strange new silence, a silence filled not with wind, but with the low thrum of machinery, you realize the strategies you learned in the vastness haven't left you. They've simply migrated inward, and their echoes are being discovered in the most modern of voids. Consider the open ocean. For centuries, Polynesian voyagers used wayfinding techniques stunningly similar to your own, reading star paths, watching wave patterns, like your wind-sculpted dunes, observing the flight of birds for land, like your smell of raba, and holding a mental map in chants and stories. NASA engineers, when designing autonomous probes for deep space, study these very techniques. A spacecraft beyond the reach of GPS must navigate by star trackers, cameras that lock onto constellations, just as you locked onto Ul-Jal. It must have redundant systems, a kind of technological trust in the camel, and the patience for long, uneventful cruises. The gentle strategy of celestial navigation, born under a desert sky, is now humanity's method for crossing the ultimate desert between planets. Then there's the human mind itself. Neuroscientists are fascinated by the cognitive maps we build. Your hippocampus, that seahorse-shaped region deep in your brain, doesn't just store spatial memory of your city. It maps social connections, concepts, and life trajectories. When you learned the desert through poetry, you were literally weaving landscape into your neural architecture in the most durable way possible. Modern studies on memory champions find they use techniques like the memory palace, placing concepts in a familiar spatial journey, which is essentially what your root poems were, a palace of the desert. The gentle strategy of encoding knowledge in story and space is now a validated hack for the mind, a way to navigate the vastness of information in our digital age. Even the philosophy resonates. The camel time you entered, that state of deep, patient presence, is now a sought-after antidote to the frantic, fragmented attention of modern life. They call it mindfulness, flow state, or deep work. It's the recognition that to truly navigate complex problems, you must sometimes stop chasing the horizon and focus on the immediate step, the single breath, trusting the process. The desert taught that not as a wellness trend, but as a non-negotiable law of survival. Your gentle acceptance of the environment, your collaboration with it rather than domination of it, is echoed in the growing fields of ecological design and sustainable systems thinking. We are, belatedly, learning that the best way to navigate a complex system is to listen to it, just as you listen to the wind and the sand. Historians still argue whether this ancient knowledge has any practical application in a world of satellites and AI. Can it help a lost hiker? Perhaps. But its greater gift might be metaphorical. In an age of constant noise and digital distraction, the Bedouin's art is a reminder of the power of quiet observation, of deep memory, of moving in harmony with a system larger than yourself. It's a lesson in how to be found when you are lost, not just in a desert, but in life. The specific stars may have names you've forgotten, but the act of looking up, of seeking fixed points in your personal chaos, is a strategy that will never grow obsolete. The last of the daylight fades from the concrete walls of your room. You walk outside, away from the generator's hum, and look up. The stars are still there. Washed out by light pollution, perhaps, but there. Old Ab al-Akbar is still turning. Old Jar is still steady, unblinking. A calm settles over you, deeper than the relief of reaching an oasis. You haven't lost the map. The oldest map of all is still above you, and the skills to read it are not in your tools, but in your perception, your patience, and your willingness to be still and listen. The desert's greatest lesson was never about controlling the journey. It was about understanding your place within it, moving with a gentle, attentive grace, and finding your way not by conquering the emptiness, but by becoming a conscious part of its beautiful, stark logic. The journey inward, you realize, has just begun. The stars overhead, those ancient, gentle guides, seem to soften their brilliant pins of light into a diffuse, comforting glow. The tension of the long crossing, the strain in your calves from climbing dunes, the parched feeling in your throat, the intense focus of reading the night sky, all of it begins to ebb away, replaced by a profound and weary gratitude. You are safe. You are still. The relentless, demanding dialogue with the landscape fades to a quiet murmur, a memory now woven into the fabric of who you are. Think of the sand, not as an obstacle, but as billions of tiny, polished stones, each one a testament to time and the patient work of the wind. It shifts, it changes, it erases footprints, yet it also holds the warmth of the sun long after the day has ended, offering comfort in the cold night. Your journey across it was a temporary conversation, a brief signature on an endless page that the next breeze will gently smooth over. And there is a deep peace in that impermanence. Your struggles, your calculations, your moments of fear and triumph, are all part of a cycle as old as the dunes themselves, not diminished by their scale, but given a quiet, humbling context. The camel's steady, plodding gait becomes a lulling rhythm in your memory, no longer a jarring motion but a soothing cadence that measured the passage of a world. The scent of dry thyme and of dust after a rare rain, the taste of bitter coffee shared in silence, the incredible weight of the starry silence, these are the treasures you carry from the emptiness. They are not commodities to be traded, but sensations that have recalibrated your very being. You learn to see not just with your eyes, but with your skin, your ears, the very roots of your hair. You learn that the most profound knowledge is often held not in shouts, but in whispers, the whisper of sand grains cascading down a slip face, the whisper of a guide's poem recited at dusk, the whisper of your own resilient heart, beating in time with the slow pulse of the desert. So let the vast, serene quiet of that landscape now fill the space around your resting mind. Let the memory of the cool night air, so crisp and clean it felt like drinking light, wash over you. Feel the soft, phantom pressure of the woolen blanket, the deep, solid certainty of the earth beneath you, the generous, unending dome of the sky, a ceiling that never closes in, but instead opens up into infinity, promising that there is always a guide, always a fixed point, if you only know how to look. You are no longer traversing the Rub-al Khali. You are cradled by its lessons. The strategies were gentle because the truth is gentle. You are part of the world, not its master. And in that belonging, there is immense safety and a quiet, unshakable strength. The desert's final gift is this deep, enveloping calm, the knowledge that you can navigate any void, external or internal, with the tools of patience, observation, and trust. Now, let your breathing slow to match that long, patient horizon. Let the stars behind your closed eyelids dim to soft, distant points of light. The journey is over. You are home.